Iran and the United States are both hailing their tentative agreement to end the war in the Middle East. But with formal signing ceremony expected just days from now, very little is known about what the agreement actually says. U.S. President Trump is adamant Iran will not have a nuclear weapon and the Strait of Hormuz will be open by Friday. Iran is meanwhile insisting on Israel's withdrawal from the southern Lebanon as part of the deal.
There's tentative hope that oil tankers could once again be sailing through these waters after the US and Iran announced the first steps of a peace deal. But despite a softening of rhetoric from Donald Trump and the Iranians, Benjamin Netanyahu made it clear he will not pull back from his military campaign in Lebanon after an outcry from Israeli politicians.
And secondly, regarding Lebanon, we have created a buffer zone, a security zone, and we will remain there as long as necessary. Iran wanted us to withdraw from there, but that did not happen. Do you know why it didn't happen? Among other reasons. Because I stood very, very firm.
Iran says that any continued action in Lebanon would constitute a violation of the fragile agreement.
Any military attack by the Zionist regime on Lebanon from now on, or the continued occupation of Lebanese territories from now on, will be considered a violation of the Memorandum of Understanding in our view.
Speaking at the G7 summit in France on Tuesday, the US president was keen to distance the US from Israel's ongoing incursions in Lebanon.
I saw that attack. I saw where that bomb went. Did you see what happened? That was a vicious, that was too much. I've had a great relationship with Bibi, but now Bibi has to be more responsible with respect to Lebanon.
All eyes are now on Switzerland, where the US and Iranian officials are set to meet on Friday to begin negotiating a final agreement.
Let's bring in Gideon Rose, an American foreign policy expert and an adjunct senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. So good to see you, Gideon. You know, Israel has already rejected the demand that it withdraw from southern Lebanon. Do you think that this is an issue that will sink the US-Iran deal?
No, because the pattern in these wars, whether it's Vietnam or Korea or Afghanistan, eventually probably even Ukraine, certainly here, is the dominant power decides when the war will end and brings their junior ally along, kicking and screaming if necessary. And that's what we did with South Vietnam in 1973. It's what we did with South Korea in 1953. It's what we're doing with Israel now. In return for not screwing up the U.S.-Iran agreement, Israel will, in effect, achieve some autonomy in its area. So the conflict in Lebanon will continue as before, and the Israelis will not listen to the U.S. in terms of stopping everything, but the Iranians and the Americans will go ahead with their deal no matter what happens with the Israelis in Lebanon.
And just to follow up with you on that, Gideon, I mean, we've seen so much fire. In fact, you know, especially, you know, this one phone call between President Trump and Netanyahu, some questionable rhetoric used during that phone call. Do you really think that Trump has the ability to pressure Netanyahu? Because for Netanyahu's part, he does need to save face a little bit among his public and not just seem as if he's, you know, a lackey of the U.S. president.
I mean, yes and no. That's true for all the players involved. And so there's always a two-level game going on in which these leaders are playing to their own political systems at the same time that they're playing against their international opponents. And sort of how those balance out, all of them are facing the same questions. Trump is getting crap from the American right for not being tougher. Netanyahu's getting crap. I'm sure there are Iranian leaders who said you could have held out longer and are criticizing the deal from the right inside Iran. So at the end of the day, it's what is the pressure that is available to be used and what is the will to use it. And Trump certainly has that pressure on Netanyahu. The U.S. has extreme amounts of support that it gives Israel, and it's Israel's most important ally. But the question has been whether there's any will to use that, and for how much and for what. And so we'll see. The answer is some kind of, look, this operation wasn't intended as what the Israelis call mowing the grass. It was supposed to be more decisive. It was supposed to end the problem either of the nuclear program or the regime, but it's not going to do that. This is going to have been a large-scale mowing the grass operation in which everything goes back to exactly what it was beforehand.
Okay, so before we continue to talk about the politics, give us a sense, and you were leading us there with what you're saying right now, because give us a sense of how effective this campaign has been. Israel has been trying to degrade Hezbollah's military capabilities. We've really seen Israel expand its military footprint within Lebanon itself to levels that, it hasn't been seen in decades, we have to say. And yet Hezbollah retains the ability to strike Israel. So how effective has the campaign been, really? Do we know?
I mean, it depends by what measures you want to use to judge it. Militarily, just like the Iran war for the United States and Israel, militarily, tactically, very successful in lots of ways. And yet, strategically, politically, in terms of achieving a fundamental, durable political objective, which is why you supposedly did the thing in the first place, not successful at all. So that's probably what's likely to happen with Hezbollah, which is the Israelis are essentially trying to end a threat without having full-scale colonization of the neighboring province, which is filled with people who hate them and don't want to deal with them. And it's there is no good answer to that problem. And so the Israeli answer has been to fight every few years, back off, and then fight again. And that pattern is likely to continue.
Something just developing in the past few hours I'd like to ask you, and perhaps it speaks to Netanyahu's position domestically and the political forces at play. Within his coalition, the far-right finance minister, Smotrich, he just announced that he will scrap this 3-decade-old Hebron agreement with the Palestinian Authority, and that numerous powers in the divided West Bank city of Hebron and at its holy sites would no longer rest with the Palestinian Municipal Authority of Hebron. The foreign minister says, oh, no, it's not been canceled. What is going on here right now with the politicking within the country?
This is what happens when you get rid of your brand Mauer. There used to be an informal agreement among mainstream Israeli parties, parliamentary parties, that you wouldn't ally with extremist small parties as part of your coalition. Netanyahu abrogated that understanding, informal understanding, a few years ago and allied with extreme right-wing nationalist parties. And as return for that, for their political support, they got some members in the cabinet. And so what you're seeing now is what happens when you sell your soul politically to maintain a parliamentary majority and depend on an extremist party. The things its ministers want to do are things nobody else in the government really wants to do. And you end up having fights within your own coalition without actually suppressing the extremist position because it's what you depend on politically. So
and we
if
have
I
to
were
say,
German, I would be looking at this going, wow, that's interesting.
And we have to say the president of the Palestinian Authority has warned of the seriousness of such a move. Just briefly before we go, could Smotrich just cancel the Hebron agreement?
Almost certainly not. And ultimately, what matters here is whether the Israelis are ultimately going to understand that there has to be a two-state solution and move towards it. If you were to do that, it wouldn't be with Hamas, it would be with the PA. And so the question becomes, at what point will this Israeli government, almost certainly not, or some future Israeli government, probably, eventually come back to the table and recognize that the Palestinians are not going anywhere and have to be dealt with and can't just be colonized.
Gideon Rose, so much to talk about. We thank you so much for joining us here on DW News, Adjunct Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Good to chat.
Thank you.
And joining me now is Barbara Leaf, one of Washington's most experienced Middle East diplomats. She served as U.S. ambassador to the United Arab Emirates, and she was the first director of the U.S. State Department's Office of Iranian Affairs. Ambassador, it's good to have you on the program. Let me start by just getting your reaction to what we've heard from President Trump about Israel. He says that he's, and I'm quoting here, not happy with the way Israel has handled Lebanon. How unusual is it for a sitting U.S. president to level that kind of criticism at Israel publicly?
Pretty unusual, Brent. And, that's, I would say that even for President Trump, it's, he has been uncharacteristically almost brutal in his commentary to and about Prime Minister Netanyahu over the course of the last 10 days. That's clearly a measure of his frustration with the way that Lebanon has been and will continue to be a bit of a wrecking ball for the onward projection of these talks.
The president has also suggested that Syria could deal with Hezbollah more effectively than Israel. I mean, we have to let that sink in for a moment. How seriously should we be taking this suggestion?
Well, let me say that it is highly alarming for people in the region, whether they're, especially the Lebanese, but also Syrians, to be urged to have Damascus insert itself into Lebanese affairs again. I mean, they've been through 40 years of that, longer actually, with the Assad family, and so it's not only a revisiting of a very bad history between Damascus and Beirut, but more to the point, it would almost certainly exacerbate what are already pretty sharp sectarian tensions in the country. So the last thing that anybody should want to see is Syria, which has done political and economic transition successfully, that we should see Syria getting involved in the mess of Lebanon.
But if we stay with this suggestion for just a moment, Ambassador, I mean, what practical tools does the new Syrian leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, what does he actually have in his toolkit that would weaken Hezbollah's position?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Let's recall that Syria is a year and a half, not yet 2 years into its own long and what will undoubtedly be painful, complex transition away from half a century of really despotic and criminal rule by the Assad family. It has no money to spare. It has a national military force, which is still being rebuilt. It has its own sectarian issues and ethnic issues within the country, very much a byproduct of, again, the way the Assads rule the country. So the last thing that we should be urging the Syrians to do is to turn away from their own internal issues and get embroiled in the mess of Lebanon.
This reported new framework agreement between the U.S. and Iran, it appears to leave Hezbollah largely outside of the formal negotiations. In your opinion, why wasn't that issue tackled directly?
Well, it would appear that President Trump initially agreed to have Lebanon be part of the ceasefire zone when that original April 8th ceasefire was hammered out or was announced. That's to judge by both sources who said so, but also the foreign minister of Pakistan himself validated that it had been part of the agreement. In any case, once he heard directly from Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Trump stepped back from that and then pivoted to a separate effort to host and to further a set of understandings, discussions between the Lebanese government and Israel, and to concoct a ceasefire over that.
Mm-hmm.
And simply, in no small part because Hezbollah itself has been willing to attack and to ignore the ceasefire. Israeli troops are on Lebanese soil, but that's a provocation for Hezbollah, or at least it's something that they can wrap themselves around as part of their resistance mission. So, but the real issue is that the Iranians have insisted on tying those two pieces back together. President Trump has succeeded in that.
Iran says Israeli forces, they must leave southern Lebanon for the war to truly be over. Israel says that it's going to stay. How difficult is that gap to bridge?
Oh, it's impossible to bridge at this point, unless it completely unravel the U.S.-Iran negotiations. But this is going to pose a dilemma early and often in these nuclear discussions, because you can have a ceasefire, but that either side more or less observes in Lebanon. Mm-hmm. But the fact is that the Iranians are already up in the game, upping the demands, which is, and Hezbollah has been saying this consistently, ceasefire can only really stand on the Israeli Defense Forces leaving southern Lebanon. So that's where the president's going to have to make a call. And that's a separate negotiation internal to Lebanon that, again, risks derailing Iran.
Israel, as you're aware, is not a party to this latest agreement between Iran and the U.S. Prime Minister Netanyahu, he wanted Iran's missile program and its regional network. He wanted that addressed. Now, if this agreement leaves those largely untouched, can it survive, in your opinion, Israeli suspicion or even Israeli action?
From what I've been told, those issues are not on the agenda. It's not only that the administration isn't talking about them, they have quietly excised them from the agenda. Now, on the one hand, the proxies, the network of regional proxies, the U.S. and its partners have lots and lots of tools to use against them, ranging from economic sanctions, designations of individuals as well as groups, to the kinetic. And these proxies are not all in the same state of the good state of condition. So I personally have long felt that trying to put that into the negotiations would be a fool's error. The Iranians would simply spin this endlessly, get nowhere. And there are tools, as I say, that are at the ready to deal with that. And they are in different states of disrepair. We see that in Iraq, where there is growing political pressure to fall in under a state's military. As for the missiles and drones, that's a big issue. It's a big problem. But apparently that will not feature as part of the agenda. How Israel will deal with that is an open question, because judged by what the president has done so far, he's not going to brook separate reaction. And as a practical matter, Israel would be up against a lot to try to have separate.
Ambassador Leaf, we appreciate your time. We appreciate your valuable insights, your experience, helping us to understand the context that all of this is happening in. Thank you. Well, for more, I'm joined now by Yossi Mekelberg. He's an Israeli-born professor of international relations and a senior fellow in the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House in the UK. It's good to have you on the program, Yossi. I want to just ask you about this deal, the U.S.-Iran deal. It is being sold as a turning point, but it's also easy to see this as just a pause before the next round of attacks. What do you think it is?
Good evening. Thank you for having me. It all depends what to follow. What we get is in drips and drabs, you know, what is in this deal. So we can quite be sure that it will bring to the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, that of course for the United States, for the Gulf, for Europe, it's very important. But the question, what happens with the core issues that actually Israel and the United States decided to go to war and preempted all of this major crisis? What happened to the nuclear exactly? And what happened with supporting Hezbollah or Hamas or Houthis? These are major questions that needs to be looked in details. Now, much of any agreement is based on trust, and definitely there is no trust between Israel and Iran, but even the one between the United States and Iran, it's very limited. But it's at best, it starts a process. Where it's going to lead, it's still open-ended.
Iran says that the ceasefire deal also includes Lebanon, but I'm sure you're aware Israel is still striking targets there. It says it's not going to leave southern Lebanon. Is Israel now the biggest threat to peace?
I think the problem is leaving a lot of conflicts unresolved. And we saw it was October that ceasefire was declared in Gaza. And what happened? Israel actually increasing its occupation of Gaza. It was just about 50 and then 60, and now Prime Minister Netanyahu talking about 70% of Gaza. Where is the Board of Peace? Where is the technocratic government to run Gaza? Where is the reconstruction of Gaza? Nowhere to be seen. Very similar. If this is the pattern, it probably will continue also in Lebanon. You know, we just heard the clip where Prime Minister Netanyahu say, we created a buffer zone and we are not leaving. So how the war comes to an end, that Israel is still occupying parts of Lebanon. Hezbollah, even, you know, according to the UN Security Resolution that is 20 years old, 1701, is not disarming. The Lebanese government is not taking over all the land, all the territory, all the way to the border with Israel. So we just let this conflict to fester.
Yeah, I mean, you know, these things that you point out, they do not appear to be at the top of the foreign policy agenda of the Trump administration. And with Israel now effectively going its own way, it appears to be going its own way. Do you see it breaking away from Washington, D.C.?
I mean, this will be a bold move, not in a positive way, but this is also election time in Israel. And Netanyahu is facing this election with nothing to show for in the last 4 years. From attacking the very democratic foundation in Israel to the worst day in Israel history on October 7, 2023, being involved, embroiled in wars in many fronts with no conclusion, with no strategy, with no exit plan, and with no political or diplomatic horizon. So his only way to maybe give themselves, so to speak, a fighting chance is to continue at least on some of the fronts. It's not very likely to be Iran. So then more likely whether continue in Gaza, the West Bank, or in Lebanon. But you know, it's at the end of the day, between now and sometimes in October, it will be for the Israeli electorate to decide, is that what they want, or they want something very different?
Yossi, you have been very clear in your analysis of the costs of repeated cycles of violence. Is Israel's strategy, particularly with Lebanon and Hezbollah, is it making long-term stability in the region almost impossible?
I think it makes it very, very difficult. And it doesn't serve Israel's interest. At the end of the day, Israel, as a small country, as militarily powerful as it is, as economically successful as it has been in recent decades, can't always live on the sword. Yes, it has legitimate security concerns. Whether it's Hamas, it's Hezbollah, it's Iran, nuclear, it's all legitimate. But having only one trick in its disposal of using military force, an excessive one, not going to solve Israel's long-term security. At the end of the day, the only way to resolve it is diplomatically. If we just take the example of Lebanon, there is a willing government in Lebanon, not always able enough, but a willing one that has common interest with Israel to weaken Hezbollah, to weaken the influence of Iran's influence, with Syria not as close to Iran as it used before Ashara became president. There also create opportunities, diplomatic opportunities. Israel under Netanyahu, in the very extreme right wing, either always see and only sees risk, never opportunities, and B, there are some elements that always think about expansionism. This one give neither security Israel nor prosperity.
Yossi, let me ask you, you mentioned Syria. There has been the idea, it's been floated, that maybe Syria could better deal with Hezbollah than Israel. That came, of course, from members of the Trump administration today and yesterday. Do you think this is a good idea?
I think the Trump administration need to brush itself out a bit about of history. I don't think the Lebanese wants to see Syria back involved in their politics as much as it might be useful. Yes, if Syria, for instance, managed to completely block any transfer of weapons from Iran to Hezbollah, this is great contribution. I'm sure it can share intelligence. But at the same time, to see active Syrian troops in Lebanon, if this is what Trump suggests, I don't see many takers in Lebanon.
Yeah. We've talked with some U.S. diplomats today, and they think it is a terrible idea. We will see. Yossi Mekelberg, good talking with you. We appreciate your analysis and your insights tonight. Thank you.